Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has declared on Saturday that his country had opened the gates to the EU for the 4 million refugees that have been living in Turkey these past few years. Now, Ankara has sought international support for hosting these refugees in Turkey, and now with the Syrian regime backed by Russian air support, gaining ground in taking back rebel-held areas in northwest province of Idlib in Syria, nearly 1 million more are headed to the Turkish border in the north of the war-torn country. Now, President Erdogan has said Turkey does not have the capacity of taking any more refugees. Ankara has also been seeking to pressurize Europe into providing Ankara with more support in Idlib, as Syrian regime offensive has killed more than the Syrian regime offensive has killed more than 50 Turkish soldiers since the beginning of February this year. Now, the situation is looking like, at the moment, a kind of a test of a refugee deal that Turkey struck with the EU back in 2016. That basically stated that Turkey would limit the flow of irregular migrants and asylum seekers into Greece and essentially Europe in exchange for refugee funding from the EU. What we're seeing now as the story develops is that the EU High Representative Josep Borrell and its crisis management chief have set off for Turkey today and are expected to meet President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has by himself warned that he would allow millions more to head to Europe if nothing becomes of this. So what outcome can we expect from this summit? And what are the finer details of this 2016 deal? And how guilty is the European Union in not doing its part of the deal? We'll find out from our panel of experts. We are joined by Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi. He is joining us from Istanbul. He's a politician from Syria and a representative for the Syrian Negotiation Commission. We also have from Istanbul Mr. Can Hasasu, an analyst and output manager at TRT Arabic. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi. The situation on the ground in Syria, many across the board have said one of the worst humanitarian crises unfolding. And the EU, who has, it seems, been a bit of is witnessing a tailspin since the beginning of this year, has been blamed for not doing enough.
The human dimension of this whole conflict is the one that should matter most to the international community. Unfortunately, it is not being responded to properly. There are over 3 million people, Syrians, in Turkey, and Turkey has tolerated them, and they lived there for this long time. There was certain aid on the part of the EU. However, not enough is being done. With this new development in northwestern Syria, we have, as you mentioned in your report, over 1 million people on the border. In Greece, there are certain horrible things happening on the part of those who arrive to the Greek borders, and 1 or 2 Syrians died. And at the same time, not all those people flooding into Greece are Syrians. So everybody is now using the Syrian case in order to achieve advantages, be they political, be they economic, be they military. So we have turned, actually, as Syrians, into an international bargaining chip being used by all parties. We appreciate what Turkey is doing in terms of defending those who have nobody to defend them. We appreciate also the hosting of over 3 million Syrians on its territory. But at the same time, look at a regime, a brutal regime, that is, and those who are supporting it, be they Russia or Iran, they are calling for Syrians to come back. Now, to come back and for Syria to be rebuilt. Now, when you call for rebuilding Syria, when you call for return of refugees, you do not do the same. You do not pressure people in order to flee. You do not destroy buildings. You do not destroy markets or hospitals. This is what they are doing.
Right.
And, well, Turkey, on the other hand, is trying its best to protect those who have nobody to defend, and at the same time to protect its national security.
The national security, which has been a big concern, and it explains its presence in Syria. What you were just seeing a moment ago, footage of a rescue boat carrying mostly women and children. Many of such have been traveling through the eastern Mediterranean trying to get to Greece. And what they have seen instead is Greece patrol guards, coastal guards, trying to deflect them. And in some cases, that's been reported on various forums, trying to deflate these inflatable boats, putting at risk these innocent women and children. Mr. Hasasu, let me bring you in here. President Erdogan, earlier on Monday, we heard a comment from them and essentially a rebuttal to EU's offer to put forward another €1 billion as a financial assistance because it seems they're under a lot of pressure with Turkey opening the gates to Europe. This meeting coming up with senior Turkish officials where EU senior representatives will be speaking to. What are your expectations?
Of course, Europeans are in a panic, and they wanted to really see what the Turkish government is asking for, because they don't want to see thousands of new refugees coming on their borders. And for that, they are trying to understand the Turkish government and to offer some. But what they don't understand that the Turkish government was very transparent with them, and they tried to do their best from the beginning to solve the problem, and they were the part who were protecting Europe. Actually, Turkey for several times told the Europeans that they are actually the tampon country, which between them and between what happens in Syria, in Iraq, even in far countries like Afghanistan. Turkey was the filtering country. They were picking up the terrorist groups, and they were taking care of the civilians in all these regions. But the European Union was playing the part, without involving seriously in the solution. They tried to gain some time, but for Turkey, enough is enough with the security issues that they are facing now in Idlib. They declared they don't have the resources to deal with all these problems altogether. Right. Instead of stopping the refugees who wants to go to Europe, they will focus on its own border with Syria and the problems of the millions of people there. We are talking about million plus people on the Turkish border, but there are plus 2 million inside Idlib and the surrounding areas. In case of this areas falls in the hands of the regime and its brutality, we could expect all these people trying to escape into the Turkish land. So we're not only talking about the million people who are still trying to hold on Syria, on the Turkish border only.
Right. And Dr. Yahya, on that point you mentioned where you said that the Syrian refugees who are being bombed left, right and center shouldn't be used at this point as a bargaining chip. Considering that President Erdogan has announced that he will not close the border gates for refugees to cross into Europe, and some critics are saying this is the pressurizing tactic. However, the concessions it is hoping to get from EU, will this make Turkey revert its position on the border?
Well, it should. It should. Actually, when we say that this is a threat on the part of Turkey, well, let it be a threat. It is a threat for others to do their duty towards human rights laws, international legality issues, respect for human rights when they are refugees, when they are under bombardment, when they are treated like nothing. So he is ringing a bell, just telling the world, well, just you have to tolerate this with me. At least if I defend our soldiers, if I defend those innocent people, if I do anything at the military level, do not stand against what I do. I'm doing this in terms of self-defense and in terms of defending other people who have nobody to defend them. They are under a regime which is killing its own people, that's killing them, and getting support from the Iranian militias and from a superpower called Russia in order also to kill them, to just make them flee. Where did they go? The only way is to Turkey. They cannot go towards the regime. The regime is claiming that it is liberating this land from terrorists. If the regime is liberating this land from terrorists, as it claims, those people would not flee towards Turkey. They would flee towards the regime. And this did not happen.
The position that Turkey is in is a very difficult position. However, it cannot be neglected, ignored here. The 3.7 million refugees already reside here in Turkey as a result of the Syrian crisis. What could have been a position for the EU would have made sense if it had put that kind of pressure on Russia. Would it not, Dr. Aridi, if I could get your comments on this, because they have been the ones providing the air support to the Syrian regime on this offensive in Idlib.
Russia seems to care about one thing. When it calls for the return of refugees and when it calls other countries for reconstruction. It cares about money. It is the mentality of a gang that has gone into Syria claiming that it is invited by a legal regime, which is actually not legal at all because it kills its own people. When you are there, you just put yourself in a position of a gun for rent. This is what the situation of Russia. And it has been bombarding Syrians for 5 continuous years since 2015, when Putin said that I will be there for 3 months and we would solve the problem. And he has been there for 5 years. No problem was solved. And he has been under the pretext of fighting terrorism. If the 23 million Syrians are terrorists, then Putin is right. Actually, they are not. They are fleeing, they are running away from this brutality. And the only goal he has is to keep this brutal regime, the Assad regime. And now, when those people flee, this would put pressure on Europe and develop more understanding. And we notice some sort of positiveness on their part. And that's why things are in the northwest, in Idlib, are taking a good shape, I believe. And hopefully tomorrow, with this summit between Erdogan and Putin, there could be a solution. It could be ceasefire, and Sochi Accord would be adhered to, and those militias would go back to the lines of the Sochi Agreement, and that would be solved, and people would go back to their homes.
That is
half
the hope.
of them were destroyed.
Right. That is the hope here. But Mr. Hasasu, while we're still discussing this, let me ask you this: what your take on it is that the criticism that is right now focused on Turkey, on its decision, on its announcement of opening borders to Europe, going back on the 2016 deal, when Greece has tightened border control and violated international law by turning back refugees from Syria arriving by boat, when they have lobbed tear gas canisters, they've even killed one youth, they have blinded so many children, refugees. I mean, where is the criticism from the international community there?
Well, actually, yes, this is what has been criticized in the Turkish media as well. Turkey is really condemning this act, saying, where is the European press? Why don't they see what's happening on the border? And actually, it's not a new thing. It's been years, and migrants from Africa are sinking in the Mediterranean Sea while they were trying to get to France or Italy in Europe, or the other refugees were sinking with their boats in the Mediterranean while they were trying to reach Greece. Now it's much more obvious. We see these people in masses trying to cross the border, and this is really a shame in the eyes of the Turks, and they see that the European Union maybe is not what it's claiming for, or it's far from the image that it presents. But Turkey from the beginning was asking for a free zone for the Syrians to live in their country in dignity, and Idlib being part of this free zone with the other areas that controlled by the Syrian National Army right now, which supported by the Turkish army, and Turkey was offering this. But it seems like the Russian and Iranian supported regime sees Idlib as a last standing point that they could really take it back and declare a kind of victory. But it's hard to understand what kind of victory they are thinking of, since the half of the country is controlled by the American-supported forces in the other side. And really, as our other guest mentioned, millions of its citizens are against the government, and they are fleeing to all the countries surrounding Syria. So definitely the world needs to go back to the point zero, which is questioning the legitimacy of the regime in Syria and trying to understand why these people are running away. This can't be a madness between the Syrians. They should have a reason to leave all what they have. And the ones who are trying to hold on their country, on their land, has the protection that they are asking for from the Western and the European countries either. Right. So all these things are making the Syrians and Turkey actually really upset about what's going on, not only on the border, but in the region as a whole.
No, there's something you said there, Mr. I want to bring this up with you, Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi. This point that the EU is right now in a position where it is coming across far from the image they would like to project. I mean, is the image, if there's any mistake in anyone's mind, I mean, isn't the EU's image very clearly very right-wing, very populist-centric? They are terrified of the idea of migration. They are terrified by the idea of immigrants coming up. It seems so rich coming from the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, saying that Turkey's move is unacceptable. And then when the EU Commission chief, she says that we would like to see those who test Europe's unity, they will be disappointed. What do you make of these statements coming, considering that there are 1 million Syrians right now who have absolutely no place to go, hiding from the bombs that their own government is shedding on them?
We have been hearing such statements for the past 8-9 years. This is the situation. Actually, half of the population is displaced, and half of the country is destroyed. There is over 500,000 people in jails. And this war continues. The regime is convinced by Russia, or the regime is convincing Russia, that it is going to control the geography of Syria, and when it controls the geography of Syria, things would be all right, the regime could be rehabilitated. Nobody would buy such a story. These statements we have been hearing from the European Union, from the world. There is one source of the problem. There is a regime that said early on, I either rule Syria or I'm going to ruin it. Please try to understand this equation. This regime would not stop till it just ruins Syria and ruins its people and make them flee all over the world.
That is, which is in itself threatening international peace itself. But very quickly, Mr. Hasasu, we're running out of time, to get your comment on this. This opportunity right now with this meeting ahead with Turkish officials and senior EU officials, is this more important right now? It's more about the concessions it needs, or the pressure it needs on Russia, than it is about funding.
I don't think will come with a very life-changing solutions or outcomes. The meeting tomorrow between the Turkish president and the Russian President Putin will be much more important. At least it's going to have some effect on the crisis in Idlib, and it will give us a clearer idea. But at the other hand, European countries, I'm sure that they have a very good knowledge of what's happening in Syria and what needs to be done. And the meeting between this level of meeting between the European Union and the Turkish officials will serve the purpose of continuing the information transfer and the diplomatic ties only. I don't think it will have a dramatic effect on the problem, at least if the European Union, with its leading political powers, decide that they should do something really. They should do something in Syria to solve the problem, and that could be supporting the Turkish plan to have a safe zone for the Syrians in their own country, or some other plans which gives the Syrian opposition to present themselves on the ground in their own country.
All right. Thank you much, Mr. Jan Hasasu and Dr. Yahya Al-Aridi, for joining us for this part of the show. We'll take a quick short break. We'll be back to discuss more on what's developing in India on the Delhi riots front. Welcome back to Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, India today summoned Iranian Ambassador Ali Shagheni to lodge a strong protest over comments that were made by the Iranian Foreign Minister, Mr. Javad Zarif. Now, Mr. Javad Zarif had tweeted after violence in parts of Delhi last week left 48 dead and hundreds injured. Now, he tweeted about these riots which have been dubbed by analysts one of the worst communal riots in India's history. And they have spun way out of control after right-wing extremist elements and Hindutva goons have taken to the streets, clashing with otherwise peaceful protesters who were demonstrating against the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act. Now, the act, its critics say, divides India over religious lines, discriminating against the Muslim minority there and going against India's secular constitution. So on Monday, when Mr. Javad Zarif tweeted urging Indian authorities to not let senseless violence prevail and condemning the wave of organized violence against Indian Muslims, it really put off the Indian government. India, in turn, protest is saying that this is India's internal matter. Now, Iran-India relations have already been pretty strained since the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal back in 2018. Before that, relationship between India and Iran have been mostly good. We'll talk more about that because of Iran's importance to India, not just geopolitically, strategically, but also as a valuable energy source. What we're also looking to discuss here is, as the riots continue in India, the world condemnation is increasing. Now, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, they have filed an intervention in the Supreme Court of India on the Citizenship Amendment Act and informed India's permanent mission in Geneva about it. As well as we have seen OIC's special envoy on Jammu and Kashmir. He's arrived in Pakistan on this 5-day visit to see for himself the destruction and suffering caused by ceasefire violations by Indian troops along the line of control. Now, there's a lot more to discuss, but without further ado, let me introduce who we'll be speaking to today. We have with us former ambassador joining us from Lahore, Mr. Javid Husain. And we also have Mr. Hamid Reza Gholamzadeh, an analyst, joining us from Tehran. Welcome to both of you to the show. I would like to start with you here, Ambassador Husain, on the situation as it evolves. The OIC had started off with giving a very neutral statement. This is back in December. This is when the Article 370 was revoked. And the whole crisis, August 5th, had sort of started spiraling out of control, and many other events. Now OIC Special Envoy on Jammu and Kashmir is here. What do you make of this? Would you call it a change in sentiment or growing sentiment in the favor of what Pakistan has been saying all along about Jammu and Kashmir?
I think as far as Jammu and Kashmir issue is concerned, this has been on the agenda of the OIC for I think, about 2 decades now. There is a special OIC contact group on Kashmir also, which meets periodically to discuss the Kashmir issue and to present its recommendations and views to the OIC General Secretariat as well as to the Islamic Conference of Foreign Ministers, and they meet. They have annual meetings, so the contact group's views are taken into account before the OIC finalizes its position on the Kashmir issue. So what I'm trying to say is this, that as far as Kashmir issue is concerned, OIC has taken note of India's refusal to implement UN Security Council resolutions, has called upon India to abide by its international commitments, and of course has tried to express its support for the people of Jammu and Kashmir in their legitimate struggle for the exercise of their right of self-determination as enunciated and as enshrined in the UN Security Council resolution. So OIC views on Kashmir are well known,
Right.
and the special envoy of the OIC Secretary General, who is currently in Pakistan and is likely to pay visit to Azad Kashmir as well as to the line of control to see for himself the very dangerous situation which is prevailing there. That visit reflects the continued concern of OIC on the Kashmir issue, and it also reflects OIC's support to the people of Jammu and Kashmir and their legitimate struggle, and also it reflects also OIC's support to the government of Pakistan, in extending moral, diplomatic and political support to the legitimate struggle of the Kashmiri people. So all in all, I think this visit by the OIC Secretary General's special envoy is something that the government of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan welcome, and we hope that it will help in further intensifying deliberations within the framework of the OIC, so that the cause of the Kashmir cause is advanced and people of Kashmir are able to make some progress towards realizing their legitimate rights to determine their own destiny in accordance with the UN Security Council resolution. So this is what I would like to say as far as the OIC's position on Kashmir is concerned.
And it's strengthening, it seems, because yesterday in a press conference along with Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the OIC envoy, he said that that a lot had the efforts, they wanted to put efforts together to resolve this peacefully. I mean, the international condemnation towards how the BJP-led government is handling not just Jammu and Kashmir, but also the Delhi riots, and now this reaction that to Foreign Minister Javad Zarif's tweet here, Mr. Gholamzadeh calling in the ambassador, lodging a protest. What is your reaction to this?
You know, when in 2014, Prime Minister Modi was coming to power, there were warnings at that time that his profile shows that he is anti-Muslim, and he has actually in his background, he has taken positions against Muslims, and he supports this sectarian extremisms. And that was a warning that we received at that time about 6 years ago. And at the early years, he did actually try to avoid such situations and such conflicts between the different religions in his country. But now we are seeing that he's changing his policy apparently, because it's not just a conflict between Hindus and Muslims. It is a conflict that is backed by police forces. We are seeing videos of police helping actually rioters and helping people setting fire to the Muslim shops and beating people and beating to death some people. And that is the situation that we right now have in India. It is a massive attack against Muslims in 21st century, and you cannot say that it is something internal affairs. Iran has, as a Muslim country, as one of the most important Muslim countries, has a responsibility, feels the responsibility toward other Muslims who are oppressed by any government or any state. And we see that just a few hours after Prime Minister Zarif tweeted, I believe, a soft opposition to the situation. It was not that harsh, it was not that strong, but very soon they summoned the Iranian ambassador to India. So it shows that they are not tolerating any opposition to the situation, and we need international, worldwide condemnation of the situation that is going on in India. You cannot just kill people, or you cannot just target people because of their faith. Because they are Muslims, you want to force them to leave the country, or you want to kill them, or you want to put pressure on them. It's not something understandable and tolerable in nowadays.
I want to talk more about how this affects the relationship between Iran and India, because that bilateral relationship back in the 60s was seeing quite a bit of a boom. There was a lull in the 70s, but then again, until the US pullout from the 2018 deal, things were looking good largely. But before we get to that, Ambassador, if I could come back to you, the reaction we have seen, like Mr. Gholamzadeh said, that any kind of criticism, the BJP government takes it really badly. But it's not the first criticism coming from international leaders. This has been building up. How long do you think before there is some kind of unity on the international forum against what the BJP-led government is letting go by on its streets in India?
First of all, I think we need, personally, I was not surprised by the conduct of the BJP government under Prime Minister Modi. We all recall and remember the massacre of Muslims, the massive massacre of Muslims that took place in Gujarat. When Mr. Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat, about 2,000 Muslims were killed by Hindu mobs at that time. And even at that time, the government of Gujarat, that was controlled and by Mr. Modi as Chief Minister, in a way played either a passive role, or in some cases, they even helped the Hindu mobs in their attacks on the Muslims in Gujarat. So his history, Mr. Modi's history of membership of RSS, he has been a lifelong member of RSS, which is a Hindu militant organization. His views and his past conduct should have warned all of us and everybody and the rest of the international community of what the direction that the things are going to take in India. And our fears have been unfortunately proved right by the Indian government's actions last year.
No, but Ambassador, you talk about how Prime Minister Modi's history of Gujarat massacre, and something Mr. Gholamzadeh also talked about, how Iranian authorities were alerted of the kind of profile Modi brought forward. I mean, it should have alerted everybody. But what about the kind of alerts coming out now, the warnings coming out now? The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, they have raised concerns time and again. We have seen two proposed legislations in the Senate of the US where they've talked about this kind of atrocities on religious freedom in India. I mean, all of this has been happening, but even with US President Trump visiting India, while just 15 kilometers away, Delhi was burning, it really doesn't give much hope that the world is going to do anything about it to stop Prime Minister Modi.
That unfortunately is true, that while at the level of unofficial reactions on the part of NGOs and those organizations which specialize in protection, promotion of human rights, that has been, or even the media in the West, some articles in the New York Times and Washington Post and other newspapers, they have highlighted the atrocities being committed under the aegis of the Modi government in different parts of India, and especially the recent riots in New Delhi, Delhi, have been taken note of by the at the unofficial level, non-official level, but unfortunately the governments of the world have not yet spoken with the kind of intensity and focus that was needed so as to persuade the Indian government to change its direction. So an example, of course, was that when these riots were taking place in New Delhi, as you mentioned rightly, President Trump was there and he was saying that he expected and he had he believed that Prime Minister Modi will be able to take care of this issue, which he was not. In fact, after his departure and within a few days, about 48 Muslims' lives were lost in Delhi alone. So there is a dichotomy between the concern being shown at the non-official level by NGOs and the media and people who are committed to human rights promotion throughout the world. But the governments so far and in various parts of the world have not reacted as strongly as they should have for the prevention of the massacre of Muslims and for the abuse of their human rights in India by Hindu mobs with the connivance of the Indian police and authorities, from time to time at various places. So this is the situation that we face, and the conclusion that we need to draw from this is that we need to intensify efforts, especially within the framework of OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and also in cooperation with other friendly governments like Iran and Turkey and Malaysia, and so as to, and of course Saudi Arabia and others, so that their attention is focused on the plight of
so
the
increase the
Muslims in
pressure,
India.
you're saying, with its allies and those who are now standing united in recognizing what the BJP-led government is doing. On this point, Mr. Gholamzadeh, India had a lot vested into Iran's Chabahar port. Things were going really well until it being the kind of ally to the West, to the US, after the withdrawal of the 2018 nuclear deal, has pretty much been on the back foot. How is the India-Iran relationship progressing as these events unfold?
India currently is one of the most strategic partners for Iran because many exports and imports are between Iran and India, and many key materials are coming into Iran from India, and India is one of the oil buyers from Iran, oil customers. And so maybe that is the reason that India was surprised by the position that the Prime Minister Zarif took, and it was something that they didn't expect, I believe. But it doesn't mean that Iran is going to actually have turn its face to the other side and ignore the situation that is going on in India against Muslims. Iran needs India right now, and also India needs Iran's business. But still, Iran has some principles, and it doesn't allow that to ignore what oppression is happening against Muslims. And that is the situation, that the problem that we have in the world is that you just mentioned President Trump traveling to India. The problem is the hypocrisy that many Western countries have. They are saying something, they condemn the situation just in words, and they're not taking any real positions that would threaten their interests. Unlike Iran, it already needs India, but still takes the responsibility to oppose and to criticize the situation in India.
An important bilateral,
you can see
and in bilateral relationship, you're saying, but Iran stands on principles where India is continuously violating with a very undemocratic and a heinous sort of approach to protesters. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Mr. Gholamzadeh and Ambassador Husain, thank you so much for joining us here on Newswire. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you next week. Till then, goodbye.